Hello there, welcome back to the channel and the continuation of an ongoing series that nobody asked for, where I explore elements of Kazon society, and much to my genuine surprise, I have not covered this starship before, and that is the Kazon Predator class warship, sometimes simply referred to as the Kazon Carrier, but it has been confirmed that the Predator class that is referenced on screen occasionally is referring to this class of ship, so therefore Kazon Predator class. The Kazon Predator class vessel is a behemoth of a starship, but let's get over its history first. So, where did this ship come from? Because we know the Kazon didn't originate many of their own designs. The carrier was actually developed originally by the Trabe. Trabe were a humanoid civilization that also lived in the Delta Quadrant that enslaved the Kazon. When the Kazon rebelled, about 20 years or so, maybe 30 years or so before Voyager encountered them in the early 2370s, the Kazon seized much of the technology used by the Trabe and took it for themselves. That indicates that these vessels had to have been constructed at least up until, unless the Kazon were continuing to build them, which we'll get to, up until at least the 2340s, which means, assuming they've been around for a while before that, considering just how many the Trabe had, and they have no resources to build new ones, they've been building them for at least 20 years. So probably as early back as the 2320s, this classification of vessel must have been built. The Kazons would significantly outgun the vessel. The original stock version used by the Trabe was probably slower, but that is speculation, but that's because the Kazon have made modifications to their technology thanks to tech they've stolen or traded from other races. They would significantly upgun, up armor, and up tech as many ways as they could these vessels, although it should be pointed out that Trabe and Kazon technology does lack certain fundamentals in common with Federation tech, such as transporters, replicators, cloaking technology, even photon torpedoes. So the Kazon have massively inferior technology, but it doesn't mean that they can't develop or integrate new systems into them. These warships were a prime example. Their exact size was unknown, going over the general specifics. There seems to be only one known class of them, but it is possible that there were subclasses and variants, possibly depending on which Kazon sect you were part of. Also, as the Kazon heavily customized their ships, it simply could just vary from ship to ship. But its stock form, they were at least 1,000 meters in length, certainly much bigger. And they were armed to the teeth. That is an exact quote of the people that first saw these goddamn things. They were filled with smaller fighters and shuttles and other craft, and they were capable of at least entering a planetary atmosphere, although whether or not they could land is something I would probably debate considering their size and the level of technology the Kazon actually have, but it is conceivably possible. So what else do we know about the ships, other than the basics? Warp and impulse capable, they were defended by shields, they were armed with phasers. The phasers numbered between 20 and 60 phasers. The reason, again, that is so ambiguous is simply because of how heavily customized these ships were. No exact number of weapons has ever been, no one's gone out there and counted, but the Trabe have them significantly more lightly armored, meaning probably 20 weapons is probably the stock, and up to 60 is how many the Kazon modified them with. They were also armed with spatial charges and plasma torpedoes. This was as standard to this particular class of vessel. They carried a crew of several hundred, although the exact disposition is unknown, of embarked Kazon. At least 400 personnel, however, would be aboard one of these ships in order to maintain and operate them at any basic level. The crew complement, considering the Kazon would have carried troops, is probably far higher than that. They would also range in age from 12 and 13-year-olds up to whatever age. The crew would have been almost certainly entirely male, as the Kazon were a patriarchal society, with very rarely any women on board, if ever, other than Seska. So let's get to the actual construction of the vessels. The vessels are obviously built from the same basic hull geometry materials as other Kazon ships, or other Trabe vessels. Now, I would argue, as I've many times argued, that the Kazon are an underestimated power. They're not as stupid or as inferior as people think them to be. Also, the Trabe had to be using them for something. They wouldn't be able to use these ships if they didn't have some understanding of the technology. My speculation, and I think this is backed up by how you would use a slave force like the Kazon. You've got them, you're going to use them. Trabe aren't going to build their own ships. They might design them and engineer them, but the Kazon are going to be used in construction, they're going to be used in maintenance, and my guess would be the Kazon would be utilized in building these ships. As a result, they would be able to replicate them. It was often seen that like Mages like Culla preferred to use the raiders over the larger warship, despite the obvious tactical advantage a ship of that nature would give them. But these vessels did have their weaknesses, however. The Kazon, as I said, these ships were a behemoth. And in the early stages, when the first one was encountered, a Kazon warship commanded by Voyager and a Maquis raider, both ships combined believed they didn't have the firepower to take out this ship. It is possible we were looking at like the pinnacle of Kazon technology, but my guess would be they were possibly overestimating the ship's capabilities. They didn't know enough about it. But I'm going to put in a case for why, in later episodes, we see that Voyager, on its own, could engage and even destroy vessels of this size, or at the very least neutralize them. And there's a reason for that. Experience. Starfleet often shows that, given enough time, they will learn and adapt. If you give them enough time to scan your ships, learn your tactics, learn how your weapons work, learn how your shields work, the more they study you, the more effective they will be at defeating you. So, a couple of years down the line, Voyager's had 2 years to gather information on these ships, to analyze it, to come up with tactical scenarios, ways to breach their technology. And suddenly the ship that was more than powerful, despite its inferior tech, more powerful than Voyager and a Maquis ship put together, now Voyager can take on a couple of them because it knows how. You learn, you adapt, you grow. That's how Starfleet works. They don't need to overwhelm the enemy, they outsmart their enemy. Look at the Defiant class. It doesn't go bigger like a Romulan warbird, they went smaller, they went smarter. And that's what Voyager did. So that's my case for why Voyager could take on these ships and actually defeat them. So what else do we actually, as I said, know about these vessels? I believe the Kazon was still building them. I believe the Kazon could replicate them. And generally, they were a powerhouse of a vessel, but they had their limitations. This is why the Kazon outgunned them so much. Not just because they were particularly violent, but it was to try and compensate for some of the inherent weaknesses. One notable and primary weakness of these ships was their sheer mass made them vulnerable. They were not maneuverable, especially at sublight speeds. A ship like Voyager, or even something like a Galaxy class, would be able to outmaneuver these ships because they were simply unwieldy. Again, considering their limited technology, the ability to maneuver and power a ship like this was limited for the Kazon, so there were weaknesses, not to mention the inherent flaws of having weak shields and inferior weapons technology compared to most enemies that they were actually going up against, like humans, Borg, Vidians. Put them up against a real power. These ships, this only real strength was its sheer bulk, its ability to absorb damage and hopefully outlast the enemy. It actually took 8 of these ships to fully overwhelm Voyager and allow it to be captured by the Nistrum, which speaks something for how much more advanced Starfleet technology is versus the Predator-class warships. But let me know what you think about this classification of vessel. Obviously, it's originally a Trabe ship. It became a Kazon vessel. Do you believe, as I do, that the Kazon are actually still capable of building them? But share me your opinion in the comments below. It could be they're not, and they're just simply using them until they wear out. What do you think? Are the Kazon smarter than we give them credit for? And because we do see flashes of engineering competence with them every now and again. It's just never properly fleshed out. But let me know in the comments section below your opinion on this. And if you made it all to this video, I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.